Hello, Lakeview family. I hope you're doing well. I'm recording this on Wednesday in my office, and to say I've been slightly distracted this week would be an understatement. I have been very distracted, which is actually surprising to me. Not that I was distracted, because sometimes I can get easily distracted, but what I was distracted by. I have been glued to some kind of screen for most of the week watching General Assembly. Now, that's surprising to me because a lot of times this stuff, um, the business of the church, for someone who has my attention span, can be a little boring, or I can just get lost, or my mind escapes. But it's just been intriguing. I don't know. First General Assembly for me as a senior pastor, probably part of it. But I do have a deep love and care for the church, and I appreciate watching the business of the church, watching it function, and watching those who we, through our processes, have put into leadership, whether it's the delegates or the GSs or everywhere in between, the committees, all that. I love to see it work. Don't always agree with everything. If you'll talk to some of the staff or my wife, who have maybe been recipients of some side conversations, I may have some frustration at some things, but ultimately, I love the church, and I love the people who call themselves Nazarenes and those who are committed to be a part of the church. So it's fun to watch and be a part of. And yeah, I'm excited for the future of the church and think there are good days ahead. And most of the reason I think that is because of my experience here with Lakeview, with you. So I just am excited for what is to come. In all reality, the things that are happening in Indianapolis don't change how we function as a church. And yeah, and so we just continue to be who God has called us and created us to be, and seek to be called out. And speaking of being called out, this Sunday we'll start our series on what I'm calling On the Road Again, and is looking at this story of the people of Israel, a peculiar people of God, and how God works in and through them to be this God of creation that we see, this God of holy love, this God who is sovereign, who sovereignly creates and sustains. All these things we learned about, who God is and the character of God, the ways in which humanity unravels, which we talked about last week, and then the response of this loving God to come and redeem and restore. And that in large part is through relationship with people, and we see that so vividly in God setting apart the people of Israel. And there's a couple things that we pick up from the story of Abraham. The first is that God calls, and we don't know a whole lot. There's very little context, right? So Abraham, to our knowledge, Abram at the time, has no knowledge of God. There's nothing said. Maybe there's some historical kind of extra biblical texts that talk about some of Abram's kind of upbringing and who his father was, that his father was an idol worshiper. There's all these things that are kind of speculation. But according to the text, we know very little. We just kind of know where he moves from, where he's at when God shows up. And the God literally just says, leave your country, leave your clan, and leave your home. And for individuals in that context and culture, that's everything. So it's literally abandon all of these things. Leave your country that you're familiar with and go to a place that I'll tell you. Like, it's not even like, hey, I want you to go on a trip to here, have fun. It's like, hey, I want you to go on a trip, period, to a land I'll show you. Wow, okay. So leave your country, leave your clan, leave everything of your supporting structure and system. They're very relational in terms of their culture and their society and how they're formed and structured. So family is critical and crucial. So he's like, leave your country, leave your clan, and then leave your home. Like, leave your kind of your material possessions. Now, he takes a lot of things with him, but it's leave all the things that you've developed. At that time, I believe Abram is around 75 years old. So there's a lot that is established that he's just leaving. And he just goes. And I don't think it's the case that that the writer just didn't want to write much. I literally think that Abram was the type of person that heard this call of God and just moved, like had this overwhelming sense of response to this call. And so he goes. And then we see something that I think is pretty awesome. We see a command, and we see a promise, and then we see the response. Now, this is where I think it's important for us to think about this, because we read these through our lenses of typically kind of if-thens, right? So like it's the command, and then it's the response, and then it's like the promise. And what you get, if you do this, then this happens. But that's not how this shows up. It's the command, go. It's the promise of the descendants, of the land, of the blessing, and then it's Abram's response. Like it isn't like, if you do this, Abram, I'll give you this, but here's the command, here's what's going to happen, and then he responds and he goes. And in the promise as well, there's no spoken like fulfillment, right? And even as we understand the story of Abram, who becomes Abraham, he and Sarah, they don't even realize the fullness of this promise, of the fulfillment of the promise. So they're moving on just the stance of the promise that comes from God to them, knowing and believing that God's going to be faithful to this. And we even see in our story, and we'll get to in some of the kind of future stories of both Abraham as well as the people of Israel, where sometimes they lack faith, right? They complain. Abram at one point lies about who Sarah is, that she's not his wife, in some ways trying to control, and it's a lack of faith in this promise. But ultimately, you see this tremendous faith in God's promise from Abraham. And something that also we see in Abraham and the people of Israel is a kind of a repeat of what we saw at creation, right? At creation, on the first day, there's a separation. And then on the fourth day, there is a filling of what was separated, right? So it's separating the sky and the sea, and then it's filling those things on the fourth day. And the second and fifth are the same, and the third and the sixth. So there's a separation, and then there's a filling. And I think, especially as we think about what it means to be holy, to be set apart, what we would call even to be sanctified, is this idea of God separating. So God separates Abraham so that God can fill Abraham, so that through Abraham, God can bless Abraham, but the world ultimately. And so there's this real picture of God's work in creation and God's work in relationship with people is to separate and fill so that God can bless. And not just, and I think Abraham and I think the people of Israel see this, it wasn't about them being blessed, it was about them carrying God's blessing to the world. I think that's important for us to grasp. But I love that picture, and I love, again, when we see these smaller stories that are part of this large, right, meta-narrative that we find in Scripture, is we see these ways in which God works consistently. So God in creation separates and fills to bless, and the same with the people of Israel, and I believe it's something that continues to us today. So I'm going to go back to watching some of the General Assembly, but I wanted to rock this video real fast. So have a blessed week, and we'll see you Sunday.